Hello and welcome to another episode of the Career Reset podcast. So I don't have a very happy topic today to talk about. I'm going to be talking about layoffs, because if there has been one topic that is dominating at least my LinkedIn, my discussion with my clients, it is the huge wave of layoffs we are currently experiencing for different reasons. It used to mainly be for economical reasons here in Finland, but lately there has been a lot of AI-related layoffs as well, and I have to say that personally I am very surprised that this is already happening. I think many of us expected that that's something we can expect in 5 years, and now it is here. And in a way, I think it is a good thing that there are more diverse people going through this, because it will generally create more compassion in the world, in the job market, with those who have gone through it. But on my LinkedIn feed, I see quite a lot of these like open to work posts, a lot of people navigating their layoffs. And as I'm going to be talking through in this episode, there are right and wrong ways you can approach your post-layoff period. And so I already recorded one episode dedicated to this topic that was more about how to process, how to move on from a layoff. In a way, what to do. But then what I also see quite a lot are these posts that go something like 5 things you should do right away after you got laid off. And referring back to my own layoff 3 years ago, I know what kind of headspace you're in, what kind of situation you're navigating, and that 5 quick tips what to do is not maybe necessarily what you need in that moment. So I would actually like to talk in this episode about what not to do after you got laid off. I think it might be quite refreshing instead of being overloaded with loads of different advice how to restart your job search. It might be good to de-escalate that situation a little bit and feel like that not everything might be the best step forward, and that sometimes it might actually be better to take things slowly and actually process what happened, which is what I'm talking about in the other episode, which I'm gonna link here. Because jumping into action too quickly and without proper planning might just get you to a very similar, if not worse, situation going forward. Because this is now not a matter of one industry, one company, one sector. This is a global thing that affects all sectors. So the fact that you were laid off now, even if you find a job very, very quickly, which I would be very glad if that is your case, the situation may happen again in the future, and may be something that many of us will experience more frequently than we would deserve to. And developing that resilience and knowing what is worth your time and what isn't worth your time will become a very valuable career skill. So having worked with people who have gone through layoff, having gone through layoff myself, and just being frequently in touch on LinkedIn with people who are finding themselves in this situation, and they never ever could expect they would find themselves in this situation because they were in a good field, in a promising job, steady company, and all that kind of stuff, and that maybe vanished overnight. And I have a lot to say about it, and I think it's also important to highlight the severity or the importance of this situation, because sometimes people can also, with good intentions, try to de-escalate it or say there could be worse things that could happen. It's just a job, you will find another one. Main thing is that you're healthy, and that is fair, of course. Like if we zoom out, then getting laid off is not the end of the world. There is always worse things that can happen. But I want to legitimize that it is mentally very challenging situation to navigate. It is okay if you find the situation really, really challenging and like it's taking a big toll on your mental health and confidence. And if hearing or trying to tell yourself it's just a job, there could be worse things, like if it doesn't really work on you, then that is completely fine. You have the right to feel sad about it, to feel confused, to feel annoyed, to feel angry. A wide spectrum of emotions is completely valid in this situation, and in my personal opinion, I think that there is mainly a lot of sadness, fear, confusion that often gets masked as anger. And I'm going to be talking about it further in this episode. But to start off, I just want to say that it is legitimate if you feel really, really down about the situation. Even if, like if you live in Finland, you can rely on pretty good unemployment support, so it's not like that losing a job means ending up on the street the next day. But since I speak mainly with professionals in business and tech, for them, their career, their profession is a big part of their identity. They were high achievers from early age. They were told they have a great potential. They worked very, very hard to get to the jobs. They went through universities, through unpaid internships, and I don't know what else to get where they are. Maybe they were the first person in their family, first generation of people who made it to university, who got into these well-paid jobs, and now losing all that in a very short amount of time. Like that does something to your confidence, to your sense of self, to your identity. That is completely normal, that you cannot just shake it off very easily. And even though a layoff can also be an exciting opportunity, maybe just like me, you will look back and think that is in a way the best thing that can happen to me. And I'm very careful here with my wording because I don't want to make it sound like I am grateful that my company was extremely financially irresponsible, drove the company to near bankruptcy, and as a result had to do layoffs. I do not want to justify it. I do not want to glorify it in any shape or form. But from my side, I did the best I could with the situation, and I'm very grateful and proud of myself for that. And I have made some of the mistakes that I'm going to be talking about, but other things I did well. So without extending this intro much longer, I would like to dive into the actual topic. But I want to first say very needed disclaimer that also it is completely legitimate when a layoff sends you into spiral of anxiety, depression, and more serious mental health issues, at which case this is not the podcast to listen to. I am not a trained professional, I'm not a therapist, so if it's not just about feeling down but that really affecting severely your mental or even physical health, then I would encourage you to seek help. I know that sometimes we think of therapy as something that is only we are experiencing some really big trauma in our family, in our relationships, but jobs, careers, and lack thereof can be just as legitimate a reason to seek out help, to seek a therapist. So that is recommendation number one. And I will now continue with the episode. So number one thing that I wouldn't do after a layoff is immediately jumping to action. Many people in business and tech identify as problem solvers, doers, action takers, and they can think of the layoff as a problem at work that they need to solve ASAP, so they can, at the same day when the company announces layoffs, put their LinkedIn in shape, activate their network, prepare their CV. I just really think that there needs to be some time when you actually feel the feelings and process what happens and talk it through, as I mentioned, with a therapist or just with a friend, with people who have been in the same situation as you. Just being in the situation. I know that that is something we nowadays don't really know how to do, to just sit in a situation. We try to think of what we could buy and what we could watch and what we could listen to feel differently. But if you don't process it in the moment, it will stay with you. When I work with more senior professionals who have quite a lot of experience under their belt, and at some point in their career, could be 10, 20 years ago, there was a layoff that they did not process properly, it still shows up, it still limits their career in some way or another, it still harms their confidence. So the best time to process it is immediately after, because I can, with my clients also later, revisit the past, let go of it a little bit, but it's always easier if you can just sit in that discomfort and process what happened. I can promise you that if you are willing to give it a day or two where you just wallow in what happened, you will feel so much better in the long term, and any action you take after you have taken some time to process it will bring much better results. So I think this might be quite surprising to hear from a career coach that I would not jump straight into action, because I just know that people are not in the right headspace. That always the open to work posts that have been posted 1 hour after the layoff, they are just full of anger, full of bitterness. They completely miss out on the potential that could attract some nice opportunities for you. They get it dismissed as, okay, another frustrated person who got laid off, whatever. I don't need somebody else's negativity to affect my day. Always when I see some post that shows any kind of subtle bitterness, anger towards the company, and those are all completely legitimate feelings. I'm not saying that I'm shaming the people for feeling these feelings. I'm not shaming them for anything, but I'm just saying that LinkedIn as a professional platform that can attract you a lot of opportunities is not maybe the best place to talk about what injustice happened to you, because you're not gonna fix the situation that way. The only thing that's gonna achieve is position yourself as someone who's frustrated, who hasn't processed the situation in other people's minds. And what you want is that they see this like, oh my god, this super cool person, this experienced qualified professional is on the market, let me think of cool opportunities. But even though you might get nice comments to some posts like, oh, how unfair that you got laid off, in terms of your career, it's not gonna give you any kind of benefit. I know that people can sometimes get into this mindset of, well, this company sucked anyway, I wanted to leave anyway, I was already looking for a different job, and that can be legitimate. But if from this place you start sending messages to your network, people don't like to be slapped in the face with other people's problems and negativity. So you might potentially just get disregarded, or that instead of that person in your network connecting you with some opportunity, they might just say like, yeah, well, that's unfair, poor you, sorry to hear, but kind of be done with you, because everybody is dealing with their own problems and everybody is in the end responsible to solve their own problems. So even though it can feel like it's the most responsible thing ever to do, to just straight into action, hasn't been even a day since your layoff and look at you already contacting everybody and posting open to work to LinkedIn, I personally don't think that that is the right situation. Even though you might be in a hurry to find a new job, a day, 2, or even a week will not make a difference in terms of finding a new job, but it may make a huge difference in terms of how you show up once you actually then activate your job search. So number one, what I would not do is immediately jumping to action without processing it, without actually planning what would be the next step. If nothing else, layoff gives you time, and that is very valuable asset that people who are in their day-to-day jobs very heavily thinking and focused on what's happening there, they do not have that opportunity to pause and stop and think about what would be the right next step. But if you have that luxury and that time, it's good to use it productively. And productive doesn't mean immediately start sending CVs left, right, and center. Productive can be sitting down, thinking about the right next step and processing what happened. And then after you have processed it, after you have really thought, okay, now being here in this situation, having the experience I have had, what would actually make the most sense? And after that, you can start with the active job hunting. You will see that it likely will succeed much faster and you will be able to secure an opportunity that actually makes sense for you. Second thing I wouldn't do if I was very fresh out of a layoff, or this can even be, after a long time, and that is burning bridges. Learned this lesson myself. I'm a big bridge burner because I think this has something to do with my culture. I am Czech, which means I'm Slavic, and many Slavic people, maybe especially women, tend to be quite hot-headed. And you can also see this when somebody comments on my post something very stupid, something where they try to, show me. I don't really hold back. I'm not the person who would delete a negative comment or who would just let it sit there. I will fight back for my opinion. And the same is when I was in some kind of career situations that I just felt were not okay. I reacted maybe in the situation the way now as a career coach, I would not recommend reacting that way. It's not like I opened some actual arguments with anyone or said things I shouldn't have said, but I also didn't do anything to cultivate the relationships that could have maybe potentially helped me, for example, even on my entrepreneurial journey. I think I made the situation at the start much harder for myself because I didn't have anything to lean on. I burned most of the bridges, or the bridges I didn't actively burn, I didn't really cultivate. So then I was in the middle of a river and I had no way to get to the other side. And that is especially important in smaller markets like here in Finland. It's a very small country, and then when you limit it to just the capital region where I live, and then you limit it to the industry in which I operate, you in the end come to a few hundreds of people who just know each other, who know me, and who may spread a good word about me or a bad word about me. And I really did not do much for them to spread good word about me. I did quite the opposite. But this is also a very fine line to navigate because not burning bridges, in my opinion, also doesn't mean like licking anyone's butt. Is that an expression in English? I really wonder. Because as I mentioned, that I see these open to work posts where people can subtly or not so subtly express some kind of bitterness or anger at their past employer. And then on the other hand, I sometimes see that people express a lot of gratitude and thank you so much for the wonderful 20 years and all that we have done together. And that can be a valuable thing to actually say to the people, but in terms of getting you closer to your next career opportunity, it's not gonna achieve much. And sometimes it just feels a little bit forced, like that people are doing it so that they don't appear bitter, so they can go to the opposite end and start saying how wonderful workplace it was. You know, like they laid you off sometimes with an email, they cut you off all the systems without telling you anything. Like the founders drew the company to a situation where they're doing massive layoffs. You have a full right to be angry at the company. Like it would be crazy to think that you lose your job without warning, and you would be like, yeah, I completely understand, you need to prioritize your shareholders and business, who cares about my livelihood? It's fine to be annoyed, you have the right to do so, and then it's just about maybe not doing that publicly. So when I say don't burn bridges, I also don't mean that now you need to send messages to all your bosses and telling them what a great boss, best boss you've ever had, best job you've ever had. You can be kind of neutral, where you acknowledge the situation and leave with some kind of possibility that the doors will be open for the future. Not maybe at that particular company, I understand you never want to see that company again, but those people, they will maybe change jobs eventually after layoffs. This is quite common, that the people who can find a job elsewhere, they will run because it's a bit of a sinking ship, and then that can provide a very valuable connection to you who could introduce you to some opportunities in the new company. And if you have heard me talking about the hidden job market, you know that that's a very real and valid source of your next job opportunity. So in any situation where you can think like that could be a network, that could help my visibility, then that's something to pay attention to. So second thing I wouldn't do is ending some relationships that could provide useful in the future on bad terms. And like I would just try to leave the situation on some kind of neutral situation that, okay, I am not completely okay with the situation, but I don't blame individual people for this, and I am open to the possibility that I might regret in the future if I now burn these relationships. The third thing I wouldn't do after a layoff is going for some extreme overcorrection. I see it quite often that if people have a negative experience from some big corporate, they will tell me they never want to work in a corporate again, they only want some small company, and all corporates are horrible, and vice versa. If people have a bad experience from startups, which is, by the way, way more common, they will tell me that never start up again, I want to sit in some well-established corporate, I want to have my cubicle, and I don't want any of this startup nonsense. So even though, as I mentioned previously, it is obvious that this kind of experience, being laid off will have some impact, hopefully temporarily, on your confidence, on your outlook for the future. But it should not be that from a place of never again, you start making some big decisions about your future career and closing doors that might actually make sense for you. And also, if you know my story, I just decided that given the circumstances and given my long-term goals, I would try the entrepreneurship path. But it wasn't something that I decided in the heat of a moment that all companies suck and employment sucks and I will just work for myself. It was after very long consideration. Starting a business at that point had been on my mind for years, so it was in a way the most logical step the way I saw it. But when it comes from a place of, okay, I got laid off and the market is very unstable and all jobs suck and all companies suck, so I will rather be a freelancer, that is not the best starting position. And that again, in my experience, comes a little bit from the unprocessed past. That's why I've been highlighting the importance of processing the situation so much, because without it, you can make these snap decisions and throw a whole industry and a whole type of company into one bag where it doesn't necessarily belong. So even though you have some negative experience and you should use that experience in shaping your next direction, but it shouldn't be from this trying to overcorrect and trying to do a full 360 that now I was laid off, so my next step needs to be something big and something completely different. No, it doesn't have to be. It can just be very similar job in a very similar type of company, which I'm not saying that is universally the right next step, but often I see when people are trying to do this big 360 that it just creates a lot of overwhelm, and especially when they are making this decision from a place of unprocessed past, it just doesn't bring the results they are necessarily seeking. So where this negative experience is well utilized is that now, for example, during interviews for your next jobs, you should be better equipped to spot potential problems that you had with your previous jobs. Now you should be able to ask better questions. For example, if there were problems with how the responsibility was divided, if there were problems with the company culture, if the company wasn't very stable and it just caused you a lot of stress. Now you should prepare a really good set of questions and listen carefully during the interview what are the answers. And if there is any hesitation from there or your side, digging a little bit deeper to make sure that your next step, your next career direction will be the right one and you will not repeat the same mistake. But it doesn't inherently mean that by joining a corporate, if your last job was a startup, that will just in and of itself solve all your career issues. Every workplace, every company, every job has its problems, has some aspects we don't like to and we have to deal with. Even my business, as much as I love it, has aspects that I do not enjoy. But the point of me starting a business wasn't that I'm gonna avoid everything that I used to hate about my previous employers. So the third thing I would avoid is trying to do a full 360. Also, sometimes people in business and tech can be tired by the unpredictability and by all the changes, and they say that they don't even want to work in some kind of office job anymore, that they just want to work in a cafe, work in a restaurant, whatever. And first of all, there is quite a strong competition for these jobs as well. It's not like that you will decide and all the cafes will happily take you on board. But this again comes from the momentarily tiredness and exhaustion, and you need to look a bit long term in your career. That okay, now you might be tired, now all you might want is some super low pressure easy job, but how about in 5 years, in 10 years, what kind of life do you want to live? What do you want to be able to provide for yourself, for your family, for whoever? And I'm not saying those are bad jobs. Those can be wonderful, very satisfying, rewarding jobs. But what I see quite often with people in business and tech, they tend to be quite ambitious. They expect career growth. They expect more responsibility over time, higher salaries. And for example, jobs in hospitality tend to be very stable. You do pretty much the same work whichever company you join. There is obviously, by the nature of the job, there is limited opportunities for growth, for more responsibilities. And then from these jobs, it may not be that easy to then go back to the business and tech world that has in the meantime moved on. So even though now the thought of going back to an environment where you weren't that happy might be painful, just trust me that there are other companies, there are other jobs, and you don't want to throw a career you've been building for years or even maybe decades into the trash bin after one negative experience and just tell yourself job is not important to you and you just want to do something very low stakes, because that is something that you might regret. So before committing to this kind of direction, I just really recommend you to reconsider, to talk to people who work in these jobs and make this decision when you really feel like you have processed the layoff and you are in a position to make rational decisions. And the final thing I wouldn't do after getting laid off is staying quiet and maybe missing out a little bit on the momentum. So especially when some big company does a big wave of layoff, which has been happening now in Finland, I tend to see a lot of posts from people from the same company who are in the same boat. And then my eye becomes a little bit almost trained for it, that I see that, oh no, this person also got affected and they are from this company. And I feel a lot of compassion. I feel a ton of compassion with everyone who goes through this. But when there are more people going through the same experience, it can create this kind of momentum where people are aware of what's happening, they reach out, they comment, they suggest meeting with you for any kind of opportunity. And when you miss out on this momentum, it can be a little bit harder to pick that back up in the future. So I know this can sound contradictory to what I said initially, that I would wait and not jump into action, but then also there can be a bit too much waiting, like then we are maybe talking about months. So I think this is quite universal, that when you are newly laid off and you are telling people about it, that's when they tend to feel the most compassion and when they are most ready to help you. So again, I'm not saying this is something you should do 1 hour after you have gotten the email that you were laid off, but within weeks, maybe slowly starting to reach out to people and testing out the waters, what might be out there, might be a really good step, because always after big company layoff, there is that kind of momentum, there is that awareness in the market that people from this company got affected, and you are more likely that somebody will be willing to dedicate their time or think about the potential opportunity. And again, that's why the processing and thinking about your next step is really important, because when people try to help, they will typically ask, and what are you looking for? What kind of job would you like? What kind of opportunity should that connect you with? And if you don't have a pretty clear answer prepared to that, if you say, yeah, whatever, I did this, so maybe something like that, but basically any job would be fine at the moment, then that doesn't really give the person anything to work with. So then once you have thought about it and you can say, you know what, I actually decided that I will focus on this direction because that is something I really enjoyed in my previous role. So if you know any opportunities about that, I would be very grateful. We can think instinctively that if we try to be open to as wide range of opportunities as possible, then we are more likely to succeed. That is generally the approach many job seekers take, but that's just not how it works. If a recruiter hears, yeah, I can do pretty much anything, first of all, that is not true. Second of all, even though you might be able to do it, it doesn't mean that you are actually interested in doing it. And then it also makes it sound like, okay, you can do a lot of things on an average level, but companies want specialists that are really good at one particular area. By being too generic, especially when somebody reaches out to you and they offer help and they want to ask in their company, they need something specific to work with, like some department to go and ask. If you tell them, yeah, any job would be fine, they are not gonna start walking around the whole company and asking everybody, hey, are you looking for someone? Are you looking for someone? I know somebody who can do anything. That just doesn't resonate, and then the people will just say, oh, yeah, okay, I will let you know if I've heard about anything, and you will never hear about them again. But instead, prepare some very clear, narrow area in which you would like to work. Those people who are more specific tend to be the people who find their next job faster. And the same thing I've several times mentioned here, the aspects I would not necessarily share in an open to work post. So any kind of bitterness towards the past employer or any extreme words of gratitude to the past employer. Also, I would not go that path. And then what actually is very valuable in those posts is to include what kind of role you are looking for, so that people can actually see that, okay, I know some role in that field. But people who post this open to works, they tend to go very, very wide. They tend to mention every single thing from their background they touch, again trying to appeal to everybody, and that just then confuses the audience. In a job search, you can always go wider, but you should always start from more narrow and going for one specific area and communicating your background as relevant to that specific area. That is something I've been talking about in many other podcasts, but when it comes to being very open and asking about opportunities either online or on LinkedIn or from people in your own circles, it's very important to actually help them understand what kind of opportunities you are looking for, so that they can point you to something specific. If you give them generic areas that you can work in, they are going to give you some generic advice or promises that they will think about it or look into it, which they most probably won't. So to sum it up, immediately after a layoff, I wouldn't jump into action straight away when I haven't even acknowledged and processed what happened. I wouldn't be burning bridges with my current company and with my past colleagues, even though deep down I might be extremely annoyed and never want to see them again. But I would maintain some kind of neutral professional relationship. I wouldn't try to do a 360 turn with my career immediately after a layoff without properly thinking it through. I wouldn't try to find a job that would be as different from the one I lost. And finally, I wouldn't at the same time wait for many months to miss out on the momentum when people are the most in tune to help me. And I wouldn't try to be generic and sound like I can do anything and everything. So I hope this was a refreshing episode in the sea of advice you may be encountering related to a job search. Of course, I'm a person who also provides plenty of advice on a job search, many of which you will find in earlier episodes of this podcast, or of course on my LinkedIn, where I post almost daily. But the point of this episode was to give you a permission that between the moment of being laid off and very active focus on securing your next job, you are allowed to have some breathing time and space. And with the simple tips I provided in this episode, you should create a really good base to move forward in your career whenever you are ready to do so. So again, if you are in this situation, I feel you, I have been there, and all I can say is that in a few months or years' time, you can be in a completely different situation. This can be just one obstacle that you encountered in your career that sadly most probably won't be the last one. But you are not alone. Many of us have gone through this situation, and I believe in you that you will be able to navigate it well. So I hope this episode was helpful, and I will hear you in the next one.